I have a secret that's about to seriously upgrade your downtime. Mistplay is always running these massive sweepstakes, from major cash prizes to top brand bundles to thousands of dollars in gift cards for Amazon, Visa, Target, and more. You just play your favorite mobile games, earn points, and you cash out those points for entries. Mistplay is 100% free. No deposit, no subscription, no hidden fees. Download Mistplay today and start winning.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
This podcast is supported by MIDI Health. Are you in midlife? Feeling dismissed, unheard, or just plain tired of the old healthcare system? You're not alone. In fact, even today, 75% of women seeking care for menopause and perimenopause issues are left entirely untreated. But it's time for a change. It's time for MIDI. MIDI's not just a healthcare provider. It's a women's telehealth clinic founded and supported by world-class leaders in women's health. Their clinicians provide one-on-one, face-to-face consultations where they truly listen to your unique needs. They offer a full range of holistic, data-driven solutions that isn't one-size-fits-all care. This is care uniquely tailored for you. At MIDI, you will find that their mission is clear: to help all women thrive in midlife, giving them access to the healthcare they deserve. Because they believe midlife isn't the middle at all. It is the beginning of your second act. Ready to feel your best and write your second act script? Visit joinmidi.com today to book your personalized, insurance-covered virtual visit. That's joinmidi.com. MIDI, the care women deserve.
Yay Networks.
I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. In this week's episode, we are covering adventure and adventure travel. This is actually the first in our series of our Dream Bold Travel and Adventure 12-week series. And this is something that we are hosting and I am putting on in collaboration with Scott Wonke, who y'all are going to hear all of our introductions. But I am hosting a 12-week series as part of our Dream Bold series with Oxner Health and Wellness Solutions. And so this is something that is available each week. It's a 12-week series that builds on one another, and they're available through Zoom once a week. But we're recording them and we're also airing them as podcasts. So some of them, like this one, will be taking the place of my usual weekly podcast. Some of them will be in addition to my usual weekly podcast. So every week for the next 12 weeks, y'all will hear this series of experts, of education, of information, inspiration to think about even what that next trip is. As we're doing this, we've already had these all scheduled. They're in the books and things are starting to tighten up again. So restrictions are getting more prevalent. So what we thought was going to be a time to really plan and travel and start to think about taking these steps out and spreading our wings again, we're seeing might not be possible right now. So what I would encourage you though is to tune into these, listen, and let yourself dream. Let yourself think of like, when we can, what are these trips going to look like? It may not be right now, but it'll be on the horizon. And part of what we talk about in this episode today is even just planning our travel, planning what that's going to look like and starting to research, that is a little bit of an escape. It's an escape from the everyday and from the ordinary. And it allows us to give us something to start to look forward to that's outside of our normal routines. So even if travel might not be immediately on your horizon, our horizon, let's start just letting this plant these seeds. I hope that y'all are really going to get a lot from this. I already have, even as we've been lining up our guests. So the way it's going to work is you'll hear that there is a Zoom happening. There's not a Zoom happening as you're listening to this podcast, though. The Zoom is each Monday at 12 o'clock Central Time. It's through our Oxnard Health employees. It is part of this Dream Bold series that is part of our Oxnard Health and Wellness Solutions team. So it's a really cool thing that they are giving us this time and these resources to pull together. So throughout the Dream Bold series, there's different things that are covered at different times of the year. So financial is one, mental well-being is one, physical well-being is one. And I am specifically leading the adventure travel. So y'all are going to hear like, wait a second, what are they talking about being on a Zoom? You know, I'm not seeing anything. You're not supposed to be. You are only hearing this through podcast. We have a Zoom every Monday at 12 noon Central Time that we are also specifically recording during that same time for this podcast. So there won't be anything that is visual. There's no graphics on Zoom. It is just all conversation. So the entire thing can also be very audio friendly. So each week I will be joined by Scott Wonke. He is also one of my favorite people. He is a physical therapist with Oxnard Health, and he is on this Dream Bold team with me. And so he and I have collaborated to put together this 12 weeks of just like really cool content for y'all. So a bit about our first guest before we join in and connect with the Zoom. Dan Meyers is our first guest. He's actually our guest for week 1 and week 2. And he has a really cool story. He and his wife traveled the world for an entire year. We'll talk about that. And then they traveled the U.S. for another year in an Airstream. So they both lived here in New Orleans for years, and he worked for HP, for Hewlett Packard, and she worked at WGNO. She and I actually, that's how I met her. We did the weekly segments that I do on WGNO, the nutrition segments. She was the anchor who I did them with for years. So we got to be really close, got to know her and Dan really well. And through the years that we knew them here in New Orleans, while they were living here in New Orleans, they lived on a budget. They were planning, and Dan had this idea of what he wanted to do. But it's also one of those things that, you know, how when someone tells you it's a really big idea, you're like, but is this really going to, you know, not that we ever doubted it, but you would hear it, but it was hard to really understand just how significant this was and just how big his dream was. And so while we knew, okay, and it was really, let's be honest, it was largely Dan. Jocelyn she was a really good sport with it. They did a lot of the renovations on their house, for example, things that most people would hire out, they did themselves. And Dan will be talking in part 2 about how to save for travel. But point being, over the years they were here in New Orleans, we saw a lot of examples where things that they could spend money, they chose not to because they had this bigger plan, this bigger goal. So what was after years of saving and years of planning, they took this tremendous leap. And Dan was fortunate to get a year leave from his job. So he knew that his job was there when he came back. And Jocelyn stepped away from her job at the station. They sold their house in New Orleans. So they had saved and saved and saved for years. They sold their house, and because they had put a lot of the work and stuff into it themselves, they were actually able to make even more, a better profit when they sold their house. And they planned and they strategized, how are we going to live for a year on what we've saved and travel the world? And so they went down to New Zealand and they spent some time there. What they thought was going to be a shorter time turned out longer. They got a camper van. They ended up driving through New Zealand, India, Nepal, Israel, Jordan. They had such an incredible experience, all these places that some they had planned in advance that they knew they were going to. Others, it was more off the cuff. And they spent a year truly traveling the world. They had their small packs. They had these air compressors that packed even tighter what you could fit into their backpacks. They had backpacks. Dan had a front pack. They did not have the big rolling suitcases like what we think of if you're going to go take a trip. They were traveling in this way of that the backpacking style, that the essentials is what they had. They had a plan. They knew they were on a pretty tight budget. We actually met them during that year. We met them in Austria and went from Austria to Croatia with them. And so I was like, they can't go on this entire year journey excursion around the world and we don't get to have a little bit of a taste of that with them, So we met them about midway through their travels and we saw, wow, they had adapted really quickly to, this minimalist lifestyle and kind of planning on the fly and realizing not to plan too far ahead. There's certain things you need to, but there's certain things that let's just let it unfold. And while most of us are not going to probably be that disciplined to save to travel for a year, most of us are probably not going to have that opportunity, if ever, at least not in our normal working years. So they realize this is a complete anomaly. But Dan is here to share a bit about how they did it, how they saved, what changed, how travel truly influences who we become as a person. And it doesn't have to be that giant year around the world. And so as they got back, they actually came back to the U.S. and they ended up in Dallas. Jocelyn got a job as a reporter in Dallas. Dan went back with HP. A couple of years later, they did it again. And they saved and saved and saved. They bought an Airstream. They refurbished, renovated this Airstream trailer, and they drove it from East Coast to West Coast. And same thing there, actually East Coast to Alaska. And we met them, side note, we met them in California in this trip. And I remember Dan was having a conversation with my husband, Brad, and they were thinking and we were thinking you're almost there. We were in Northern California and their end goal was to drive the Airstream to Alaska. And we were like, well, you're almost there. And when you pull out a map, I'm sure a lot of y'all listening know this. We learned this as we really looked at this. California is about the midway point, give or take, between the East Coast and Alaska. So when you think about it, you're like, if you just think, East Coast, you're going to Alaska, California's almost there. No, it was the midpoint. So, but they did it. They ended up going to Alaska, experiencing, everything that was a cross-country drive in an Airstream. So again, are we all going to be able to do that and save in advance and plan and budget and then step away from our jobs and travel in a year in an Airstream? Probably not. But could we do it for a week? Could we do it for 2 weeks? That's manageable. That's something that we could look at, plan for, work it out with work, save for it, and kind of make all the accommodations. And so that's what this 12-week series is. So this podcast series that you'll hear, sometimes it'll drop again on Thursdays, sometimes it'll be Wednesdays, depending on if it's my main podcast or not. But that is the type of education and inspiration that Scott and I will be covering. And so we want to walk you through, if this is something that you want to do, it's something that you're thinking about, and it may be later than sooner. And again, with the restrictions with COVID, and we see this starting to tighten up, we realize it might not be in the next few months, it might be next year, but it's still really fun to plan. So as I mentioned, Dan is joining us for 2 episodes. The first is about that travel, about how it changed, about sort of how that experience progressed. And then the second episode he's joining us for next week is about saving and planning and budgeting and how do we prioritize. Dan actually shares at the end of this episode 3 questions, and these 3 key questions really help us to think about what's important to us, think about how we want to live our lives. He now does financial planning, and these are 3 questions that he poses to his clients to help them unravel and explore and start to really focus on what matters to them, so that as they're planning, as they're saving, as they're looking ahead to the future, they're looking at what really matters. So in the second episode of our travel series, which is going to be next week, that's what Dan will be walking us through too. So the first is we're hearing all the big about it. The second is a little bit more the nuts and bolts of how did he do this and how can we do maybe not that, but what is our own version of that travel dream? So with that, here we go. Let's go ahead and join in the Zoom. Here we are. Here is, we will get officially started. Thanks to everyone listening for being or tuning in, for your patience with us. And thank you also for joining us for our first in our series of adventure travel. So this is the first in our series of Dream Bold adventure and travel we're layering in, but it's really going to be largely travel. So I am Molly Kimball, registered dietitian with Ochsner Fitness Center and founder of Ochsner Eat Fit. And with me is Scott Wonke. He is physical therapist with Ochsner Health. And throughout this 12-week travel series, we're going to be sharing more about ourselves, more about our own passion for travel, our own personal experiences and how it's changed us, which is also why we're the ones leading this. So you may say, well, a nutritionist and a physical therapist, what are they going to be teaching me about travel or these experiences? But we will be sharing a lot of our own personal experiences. And we've also just know that we have put together an amazing lineup of travel education, travel inspiration for you. So Scott, you can tell us what's on the horizon. We've got, like we said, it's 12 weeks. This is our first in our series of 12 weeks.
Yes. So first time outdoor. So bear with us with technical details, but 12 weeks, what we have coming up, of course, the first couple are going to be with Dan. He's going to talk to us about what his inspiration was for traveling, and how everything went and how things unfolded and what it's done as far as his perspective. And then we're going to go to Travel with Lolly, and that's really talking about travel planning, these action steps that you can take to plan your travel to make sure you get the most out of it. And then we're moving right on to the Points Guy. We have Samantha coming to talk to us from the Points Guy about how to accumulate points, use them for traveling, some great strategies. It was really informative. I'm very excited for that one. And then you're just going to get Molly and I, and we're going to kind of recap everything we've already talked about. Of course, field questions as we go along and see if we can narrow some of the scope into how to decide if this travel is how to work your travel into your plans. And then we're going to talk about solo travel. And that's where we have Mimsy Ladner coming. Did I say that right? Okay, thanks. Mimsy Ladner is going to talk to us about solo travel, which is not easy. I've done that before, so we'll get some great tips.
She's actually living in Mexico by herself right now. What started as a 3-month trip, she's now living and working from there. Yeah.
Living the dream. So
yeah.
That's exciting. So we'll get to talk to Mimsy. And then again, it's going to be Molly and myself, and we're going to talk about wellness, traveling, getting prepared for traveling. You have to be healthy, how to handle some of the anxiety of traveling, some of the stressors that pop up, and really just physically getting ready for getting the most out of your travel. Then we're going to have Amber come join us. Amber's with HR at Ochsner, and she's going to help us field some of the logistics, some of the things you need to look ahead to prepare for to travel, things that as far as work.
And maybe like hard conversations to have, or what you might think are hard conversations to have with your boss about taking time off for travel. Or also, I think a lot of times people think that we shouldn't or couldn't or step away for a little bit. Maybe we think we're completely indispensable and things can't operate without us. So Amber talks a lot from an HR perspective of why it's so important to take this time away and also how to have these conversations.
Yes. And then this is the next one's very exciting to me. We're going to be talking about ski specific. So very excited. We're going to talk about some of the best skiing out west, out east, and then we'll throw in there some hiking, some rafting, what the different states have to offer. So it's going to be pretty exciting. And then we're going to jump into European travel. And I should side note, these are based off some of the survey results that we got. This is what people were asking for. So we're not just talking because we like to talk. These are things that you guys asked for. So we're going to try to deliver. So we're going to talk about the European travel and the various problems that pop up with that. I mean, there's a lot of things to hem and haw as far as European travel. And then we're going to move right into packing. Believe it or not, it's not just throw a bunch of stuff in the bag. We're going to talk about how to pack for individual trips, whether it's Europe, if you're traveling small planes, large planes, just taking into account what you're going to be doing with your vacation. And then finally, we'll just wrap it up. And by then, we'll have accumulated a lot of questions, so we'll be able to really dive into what you guys need, what you're looking for. And we're really putting this together to help you.
Yeah, so as Scott said, we had questions that went out to lots of people in our audience and said, okay, for adventure, what are some of your biggest dreams in adventure? Or what are some of your biggest dreams, period? So taking a step back, if you're not familiar with the Dream Bold initiative, this is a really cool thing. So the Dream Bold initiative was launched by Deidre Diaz. She is our VP of Oxnard Health and Wellness Solutions. And the premise, the whole idea of Dream Bold is just that, encouraging us and supporting us to be bold, to dare to dream. And I have a video that I did with Deidre actually when we first launched this. And so we can link to that in both the Zoom notes in the chat, but also in the podcast notes, because we've got both things happening and at the same time, podcast and Zoom happening and recording, which is why we have our headsets. So those of you who may be looking at us in Zoom, you're like, well, that's overkill for a Zoom. But it's because we're also doing the podcast. So we have a link to the video that Deidre has that sort of explains the premise behind the Dream Bold initiative. And it's based on the concepts that are outlined in a book called The Dream Manager by Matthew Kelly. It's an easy read. It's a relatively fast read. But if you're interested, pick it up. The overarching idea is that our success and our focus and our work life, they don't have to be completely exclusive of our own personal goals and dreams. And these dreams might be personal. They may still have a professional element to them. And the Dream Bold initiative encourages us to slow down, take a look inside what really matters, because we get so caught up in that cycle of just work and our obligations with work and family and home that sometimes we forget about what these dreams and these goals were in the first place. So the Dream Bold is a bigger initiative, a larger initiative, part of the Oxnard Health and Wellness Solutions. Scott and I are leading specifically the adventure section of this. And again, surveys went out. Hey, what are your biggest dreams? They kind of fell into different categories. Each of those is addressed at different times throughout the year by the Dream Committee, the Dream Team, as we like to call it. And with adventure, a lot of that adventure narrowed to travel. A lot of that travel was down to those two types of spaces, Scott said, skiing and European travel. I also want to say that as we're doing this is live, and it is quite possibly the worst timing, because we thought it was going to be really good timing. Like by now, the end of July 2021, that things are opening back up. And right now we're, more and more messages are coming out that things are starting to tighten back up, and travel restrictions. We would expect that, as masking is more prevalent and other steps, number of people limited in certain spaces, we can only expect that travel restrictions might follow. So I would say we're still on the schedule for this. We're still going to be doing these. So listen, let it be a bright spot in your day. And as you think ahead to like the one day.
Yes, it's never too early to plan.
And our plan is that for the adventure and travel, that we've got these 12 sessions and these experts lined up, including Dan, who's going to be leading this week and next week. These sessions can stand alone. They can stand alone on their own. So if you only tune in to a couple of them, you're still going to get a lot from them. But it's especially impactful if you can start from the beginning. So if you tune in to the third one, we'll have, again, the link to the podcast where you can hear number 1 and number 2, because they really will build upon one another. And as Scott said, he and I will be regrouping throughout it. Okay, here's what we've learned so far. Here's our travel schedule, or our plan to map out our game plan 3 months out, 6 months out, et cetera. And so if you can have them build upon each other, even better.
And of course, we'll share the Dream Bold email in the Zoom chat and also the podcast notes. So if you missed anything, or you want to read over it again or share it with somebody and get them involved, that would be great too. You'll have all those things available to you. And of course, if you don't feel comfortable asking questions, or if you come up with questions later on you thought of later, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us to ask these questions. Again, this podcast is for you guys. We want to make sure that we give you all the information you need as we go along.
So with that, let's get rolling. Our guest this week, and as I mentioned, next week as well, is Dan Meyers. Welcome, Dan. I'm so excited to have you with us.
Scott and Molly, thanks for having me.
So over the years, you've shared so many stories of the adventures that y'all had while traveling. And one in particular was like right out of the chute. And it was, y'all were really new into your travel. You were still really green as far as your experiences. And there was the situation at the Israeli border where y'all are crossing from Israel into Jordan. And there's armed soldiers. It's completely intimidating, completely threatening. There's a language barrier. Y'all want to cross, but they're resistant to it. And so you're having to negotiate, having to navigate your way through this. And it's scary as heck. And what was interesting too about that story was that you had another alternative. There was the traditional way to cross the border, which was going on a bus with a tour, but that costs money. And y'all were also really looking at how do we budget for this year? And so doing it on your own and kind of figuring it out as you did it and researching it and learning from other travelers' experiences in the different travel forums and saying, you know what, let's just try it. Let's just do it. And layering in experiences like that. They weren't all hair raising like that. Y'all had just so many that were just emotion filled or things that just expose you to aspects of life that you never thought possible. So having a year filled with that is just incredible. So as you and your wife are traveling around the world for the first time ever, you had basically a year of that. And so when you put someone who's very inexperienced into a situation like that, it feels right at that moment like it is a life or death. And I think you embrace it. You see the challenge. You see, hey, okay, where do we learn to plan ahead? Where do we learn to put our focus or spend the money or prioritize there? Meanwhile, Jocelyn's giving you the stink eye. Why didn't we just do the tour bus the whole way? So how did you arrive on this trip? How did you land on this amazing trip around the world? Because that just, I think if someone is hearing you, looking at you, they're like, well, wait, he's so young. How did he do this? Because that was 8 years ago?
2013.
Yeah. So tell us how this came to be that you made this choice to take this travel, and also just sort of how it impacted you and how 1 year later you came back with very different perspectives.
Yeah, and that was the theme of this trip. We thought we were scheduling, because we made the calendar ahead of time where we wanted to go, the itinerary. And we thought we were scheduling all these scary places that we would go before we had kids. And over again, once we got to the so-called scary place, we realized it wasn't scary at all. The people were incredibly nice. So like you mentioned, Molly, we were totally amateurs when we started this. Like we weren't world travelers. It was only through experiencing something that you truly become it. So probably 6 months in, did we finally feel like, okay, maybe we actually know what we're talking about. But there were a lot of trips that you can take intentionally beforehand to be able to enable something like this. And that's what we talked about right now in the downtime where we can't really travel. There's lots of things that you can be doing to get ready for that trip. And so the first one, of course, is money. This obviously isn't something cheap. And we were lucky that we didn't have kids, because we have a kid now and it's a lot more expensive. And so let's talk through financially kind of how we did it. Jocelyn quit her job and we sold our house. We were in New Orleans at the time, which whoever is living there, you're getting your own international experience. It's such an incredible place. But we didn't know if we'd be coming back. She quit. I was lucky to have a 1 year unpaid leave. And so it made things a lot easier knowing that I would come back to my job. I was at Hewlett Packard at the time. So it took about 6 or 9 months of pre-planning just to prepare for the trip outside of money. Things like getting your shots. And so immunizations, like there's a lot of those that you have to get to a lot of different countries, visas, travel insurance, all sorts of things like that. But then financially, it was probably a 5 to 7 year journey for us to be able to get to this. Whenever I started, so you can kind of do the math, 05, 06, somewhere in there, I was like $50,000 in debt between student loans and auto loans. And there's really no way that I could have done this trip if we didn't get our act together. So I want to share today some of the concrete steps that you can take, and also give you some references of things that you can continue to pursue outside of this this talk today.
And Dan, I'm going to stop you for just a sec, and because I think our next week I want to really spend the time on the concrete steps for saving. And spend this time just really understanding a little bit of why should someone want to travel? What makes, what are the things that if someone's listening to this and they may say, okay, well, my travel's not like that. I'm not looking at going to all these different, maybe third world countries, and my travel dream is Italy, or my travel dream is a tropical place, or it might be just somewhere in the US they've never been. They might want to do the different national parks. Whatever our travel goal is, though, whatever that is for the people listening individually, what why does it matter, and how does it
Yeah.
leave us changed?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's the little experiences that add up and that count. Like, it doesn't have to be these crazy, around the world trips or whatever to make an impact for you or for your kids. There's probably a lot of families on this as well. It's just kind of getting out there and experiencing new things. And, for us, you kind of see, like we talked about in the end, the changes that happened is that we wanted to kind of redesign how we were living. Traditionally, we had always moved to the city for the job, and we always kind of followed the money and the salary, and that's why we ended up somewhere. And so we wanted to look at it differently and say, what happens if we try to design our lifestyle first and then find the money or find the work to make it happen? And interesting, where we live now out in the West, we live in a small town, and one of our friends here said he moved here because he heard there weren't any jobs. So a lot of people out here kind of live with that perspective of how, how do we do the adventure part first and make the money work? And I know New Orleans can be the same way. I had a friend there who he talked about, people there will rather spend all their money on going out to eat, than having like a brand new car, just because you already have that attitude of kind of living first. And so,
Are you about to say something, Scott?
Yeah, I not to fast forward too much. What about coming back prior to going to the Airstream? When you came back from that whirlwind trip, what was it like coming back and trying to reintegrate back into, and especially with the new perspective that you had gained going to these foreign countries and having these experiences, and relatively, how did it feel coming back, and what was the impetus to go to the 2016 trip?
I'm going to chime in to clarify for our listeners. Danny had 2 really amazing trips. So he did the one that was around the world. And then I guess I can kind of summarize, Dan, that coming back, I think that's part of the part that Scott's asking about. Coming back from travel, the perspective was so different. And I guess tell us that. So you got back from the year, and how that then led to the Airstream trip, and and share with us the Airstream trip, because I think an Airstream trip also is it seems a lot more approachable maybe for someone too who's listening. So when you got back, so you'd spent a year, you'd had all these just like wild experiences and things that seemed incredibly surreal. And if you come back and even are trying to explain it, people, if they haven't been there, it's even hard for them to understand it. So like, you spend this year away, you come back, everyone else is operating as normal, but you and Jocelyn, your wife, have changed so much. And like maybe the things that you had value on, even though, maybe that shifted slightly. So how did that lead to, from when you got back to then you leave again and decide to do this year in the Airstream? How did one relate to the other?
Yeah. So I had mentioned the unpaid leave. And so coming back in 2014, I was lucky to have a job to come back to, but they wanted us in Texas. And so I see Margaret put in the chat that the NOLA culture definitely drew her there, which is amazing. New Orleans is an incredible place. It's a place we would love to move back to someday. But we moved to Texas. So there's a lot of great things in Texas, but we ended up in Dallas because we have friends there. And I'm from Oklahoma anyway, so it was close to family. And so I came back to work. And like Molly mentioned, a lot of times when you travel, everything seems to come back and be exactly the same, but something has oftentimes changed within you. And it was such a whirlwind trip. It took kind of months and months to really process what that all meant. But in January 2014, boom, I was right back to work. And a very stressful job, working 60 hours a week and weekends, doing kind of IT stuff and big releases. And over 2 years, I progressed and was able to take on more responsibility. And it was probably right about 18 or 20 months. Like, we knew it was different. Like, we went from living a life where Jocelyn and I were together. There's probably 5 times in that year that we were apart for more than an hour or two. Like, we became so dependent on each other and just such a natural flow. Like, it reminded me of when you see older couples that have been married for 50 years and like, how can they just be so together and just so happy? And it was a culmination of like decades of experience thrown into one that I think, and we were able to experience this whole new thing. But she went back to work too. At this point, she was a reporter in Dallas, which was kind of a dream job for her. but we weren't really even seeing each other again. We were both working so many hours and nights and weekends that this experience that we had in the past was just kind of an afterthought. And it was kind of weighing on both of us, I think. And I still remember kind of my second breaking point was that I was at home and she was traveling for work and had a lot of stress with my job. And I'm glad you guys are talking about the wellness piece later, but it was about 2 a.m. and like my heart is like beating and racing and like my breathing is getting really shallow. And like I did yoga and I worked out and I try to keep everything balanced, but something was not right. Like I was literally like getting ready to call 911 because I'm like, something's happening to me. I think I'm having a heart attack or something. And I ended up just kind of laying on the ground with my dog, Lucy at the time, and just kind of letting her breathing like retrain mine. And it was an anxiety attack. And I'd never had anything like that before. Like I prided myself in being strong and that stuff wouldn't bother me and stress doesn't get to me. And I just knew that if we continued down this path, it wasn't going to be good. And so a few months later, I found an old Airstream. I've been getting kind of into the Airstream culture and, lots of websites where you can read about that. And Jocelyn reluctantly went with me. She knew what was happening. And I'm lucky that she decided to go with. So we went down and bought this Airstream. And I was at work for another 2 months. And there's obviously a lot of financial things we'll talk about in the next session, because you can't just do this stuff if you don't have a little bit of money saved. But I was able to quit my job, and it took 3 months to fix up the Airstream. And we wanted to travel again. And this time we had our dog. The previous trip, our dog stayed with my mother-in-law for a year, which is very kind of her. But her dog was getting older and we didn't want to leave her behind. And so we set off on another 1-year trip around North America, where we could take her with us.
Can I say how powerful that is, that you were on the Jordan border, people speaking Arabic, soldiers walking around with automatic weapons, and you're trying to figure out with your wife how to get to a place. Yet in Dallas, you had the anxiety attack. Like that to me is amazing. That's why I love putting together this podcast, because it gives you that perspective. You're definitely, I think foreign soldiers with automatic rifles would give me anxiety, but it was more the work. So that's truly powerful.
The things that we think are the norm that are eliciting such a stronger negative response in us, right?
Yeah, it's truly the straw that kind of breaks the camel's back. And like with a kid and working moms and working parents, I don't know how you do it. It's hard. We're both working now. Yeah, I've started my own business, so I have a lot of flexibility, but it's hard. And so, if you're having struggles, like don't feel like it's, oh, I'm not strong enough. Like this stuff piles up, and I don't know how people do it, honestly.
It's one of those things too, that as this entire 12-week series that we're talking about, it's about carving that time out for ourselves. And it's about putting what we value and what we see as a priority. This little hour each week is to keep that top of mind, because even if, we said the restrictions might be tightening up and travel might be limited, but even if you're looking at something down the road, planning it's already starting to immerse you in that travel. So even if you think it might not be till next summer, that's okay. The travel planning person that we mentioned that is going to be coming on in a few weeks really maps out everything Danny said. Like, when do you need to do everything? That kind of stuff right now can almost be, I don't know if the word is like an escape, but it can be that positive influence, that positive outlet in what might feel like an otherwise stressful thing. So instead of thinking that as one more chore that you have to do, I think if we start to think about even planning travel, of educating ourselves and almost starting to immerse ourselves in that experience before it happens.
And then hearing from you everything that you actually get out of it by taking those trips and the perspective that you gain. And then now that you're a dad, that perspective you trade on to your little one. Because I know my father did that for my brothers and I, and I'm trying to do it for my son. That he gets to see different environments, and I want him to see that perspective. It's not just for us. So again, it's very powerful.
One thing too that I noticed, and I'm sure that you had this too a lot, Dan, as you got back from I would say when you got back from your international travel, I see, in the US, we take so much for granted. We have so many expectations. We think everything's going to be immediate and right now. When you travel, you realize it's not like that in other places. And when you come back and hear maybe people's complaints or things, it really puts it in a different perspective for you.
Yeah.
And then also living in an Airstream for what was about a year, talk about a minimalist lifestyle. So how much stuff do we really need, you know?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think travel kind of lets us see that these things of, okay, when it comes to experiences or how we process or what we choose to get upset about, what we choose to put as that, what's important to us, because it is a choice. Like, you know, if, you know, we were actually talking with my in-laws this weekend and they were talking about the guy that cuts the grass in the neighborhood. And they were stunned that some of the people in the neighborhood complain about how the grass is cut. And Brad's mom was like, it's grass. I mean, it's just grass. And she was like, these, you know, the neighbors just get all up in arms if it isn't just right. And they're calling the grass guy, you know, Mr. Joel, by the way, is like 85. And she's like, it's grass, let it go. And I think that type of a conversation, sometimes we get so worked up on things that just don't matter. And something like travel really helps us to refocus and like reset the intent of what we want to make as where we want to put our energy.
And be grateful for what we have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the minimalist approach, you know, when we think about how much stuff do we need, how many times does Amazon come to our houses or something like that versus what do we really need? And so when we're talking about packing for travel in a few weeks also, or that'll probably be like in another month or so or two, but what do you really need? It also makes you realize how much stuff we have around us all the time that we don't use. And so Dan doing this Airstream travel was like, wow, they really whittled down to, we went inside of this Airstream with, and it was gorgeous how they had renovated it. It was just really well done. But boy, every little space is accounted for, you know, and everything had to have a purpose. And so taking that experience and then bringing it back to our life is really cool as well. So
yeah, I like how you talked about the planning the travel too, and it can become an escape. And that's not always a bad thing. Like, to me, I think planning the travel almost became a hobby in itself. And so, you know, figuring out the best ways to get there, you know, what to do while you're there. And, you know, even reading books on subjects, you know, I know a lot of people love reading books, and that's, you know, sometimes you can even experience places by reading, you know, you don't have to do these crazy things. And we also figured out, like, we're so lucky to live in the US. Like, a lot of places we traveled, we would be like, oh, we have that in the US. You know, we would go to New Zealand and be like, oh, wow, well, we have Yellowstone, or you have Yosemite, or, you know, we go to Australia and the Red Center and be like, oh, well, that's kind of in Utah. And so we're so lucky in the US to be able to just drive to these destinations and be able to experience stuff. And then just, you know, what we have here, like the opportunities that we have, it definitely brings a lot of perspective to that as well.
Every foreigner that I've met that have come here, they always talk about how we can visit everything without a passport. Like you said, we can go to the mountains, we can go to the beach, we can go to the desert, we can have snow, we can have heat and humidity, we can have nonstop rain, we can have arid, we can have New Yorkers, and you never need a passport. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're hoping, that people, you don't necessarily have to leave the country, but just pack a bag and see our own.
one of the things that I think Scott and I have said is kind of our goal with this 12-week series is wherever that place is, you go all the time. And we have some of those places that are really important to us and we really enjoy it and we want to do that each year. But if that is the only place you're going when you have a vacation, you're only going to this one place over and over and over, and you haven't branched out beyond that, that's our goal. It's okay to do, we'll just say it. We'll just say,
We're going to say Destin.
Or Gulf Shores, Gulf Shores or Destin or whatever your Alabama or Florida beach. We go there every summer with my husband's family for the 4th of July, and it's a blast. But we do other things too. And so there's nothing wrong with it if that's your favorite and you love it. But our goal here and our mission is to think, okay, what else is outside of that? So just like Dan and Scott were saying, there's so much within the U.S. that you can drive to. If you don't have to buy an Airstream. You can do it with your own car. You could rent something that would be like a camper van and do a 2-week tour to where you're taking 2 weeks. It doesn't have to be a year. It doesn't have to be months long. But thinking of that and then looking to see what places and part of that research, what do I want to go to and what would work time-wise and starting to kind of budget and think that through. I want to make sure that we leave time for questions for anyone who is live on the Zoom right now. And as we mentioned earlier, if you're listening to this by podcast and you have questions, we're putting a link in the podcast that you can email us through thedreamteam@ochsner.org. But since we're live now through the Zoom, those that are tuned into Zoom can ask us questions. And while we're having any of those come through, Dan, share with us the homework that you have for our listeners for next week, because so next week we'll be talking, how do you save for this? How do you plan ahead? What are some of the strategies to prioritize? But you've got 3 questions, and we can actually, we won't put these in the chat, but I guess we could. Maybe, are you able to log into the chat and put them? Yeah. We can put these 3 questions in the chat so you can save them. But yeah, Dan, if you can go through these and maybe explain each just a smidge so that people can really be processing this.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of it gets to kind of what we talked about was designing your life and kind of living with intentionality. A lot of times when we're just kind of getting through the battle of the day-to-days and trying to make everything work, all of a sudden the years are just passing by really quickly. And you look and you're like, geez, what did I even do in the last 10 years? Like, I know everyone has dreams and hopes, and it may not be travel, it may be anything. And so the goal of this exercise is to help you kind of focus in on what's important, so that really becomes the pillar, the cornerstone of what you're trying to plan your life to. And so I'll give you two pieces. The first one is a book called Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And so this is a really good read about, and it gives you, very practical steps that you can take to start kind of designing that life that you want. And maybe you already have it. You may be exactly where you want to be. You may not even want to travel. You may be like, these people are crazy. Like, I don't want to do that. But what are those adventures, or what are those things that you do want to do? And so this kind of gets to the homework, if you will, that you're going to get assigned today. So I do financial planning with my work now, with my company, and there's a new part of financial planning that goes into another step called life planning. And so this is like, how do we prioritize what you want in life and get there as quickly as possible? And so this was all created by a guy named George Kinder. And there's actually a website you can go to. We can drop these in the chat. It's called lifeplanningforyou.com. But this is one of his exercises of what you can do to start kind of finding those priorities. So he calls it the 3 questions. There's 3 questions that we'll send you home with today, or Molly, I'm sure you can post it somewhere for the podcast. But you go through these 3 questions. It's great if you're married for you to do it, for your spouse to do it, because the answers are probably going to be different. And they probably should be different. But go through these and kind of figure out what they mean to you. And like I said, this helps kind of bring everything into perspective of how you want to be living your life. We'll go through them real quick. But this is something that, it can take weeks to think through. Like, it's not an easy thing to do because some of them are pretty challenging questions. So the first one is, you have all the money that you need. So you won the lottery for now and the future. What are you going to do with it? From this moment forward, how will you live your life? So this is kind of that great scenario, and it helps you be like, okay, money's no longer an obstacle. What do I want to do with my life?
And we'll say too, kind of letting those linger in people's minds. We'll have those in the chat so that you can snip them, save them, and marinate on them. We'll also put them in the episode notes for the podcast. And these will be the foundation of what we're building on in our second session of our adventure and travel series of our Dream Bold programming. So Danny is going to be back with us next week, the same time next week, that we're not just leaving you with these 3 questions to kind of flounder. So really think through this. Like, you have all the money you need forever. What are you going to do? How do you live your life now? What does that look like? Dan's going to be really unraveling each of these and talking through how does he address these when he's talking through them with his clients. I can imagine as you're asking clients this, someone may be coming to you for financial planning and you're like asking them these questions. I can imagine people may be like, wait, what? Like, this feels a little touchy-feely, but I would imagine they then embrace it and it probably gets them thinking about things in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, you two know as the work that you do with mental and physical wellness, that everything is connected. Like you can't just do one thing and expect it to improve all your lives. So it's the same thing with money. Money is very emotional. So we'll go into the second one, and it gets a little more emotional. So you've just come back from a visit to the doctors, discovered from your lab results that you only have 5 to 10 years to live. You don't have limitless money like you did in the first question, but you will feel healthy until you go. So knowing death is waiting for you sooner than expected, how will you change your life? And what will you do in the time you have remaining?
So the second one is completely different. If you don't have all the money, you may be in your same financial situation, but you know that you have 5 years, maybe 10 max, that are going to be really healthy years, but you've got a cap on that. Like you can't think until I'm 80 or 90 because you know, okay, it's 5-10 years and that's it. What am I going to do and how am I going to use this time?
It's like, what's the Tim McGraw song, Live Like You Were Dying?
Right.
Kind of starts to feel like that. Yeah. So the third one gets even harder. This time you visit the doctor and learn that you only have 24 hours to live. You ask yourself, what feelings am I experiencing? What regrets, longings, or deep and now unfulfilled dreams are there? What do you wish you've completed, you've done in this life that's just about to end? So this isn't necessarily regrets. Some people will go to regrets. I wish I would have done this, but it's more those unfulfilled things that you always wanted to do. Maybe it was, write a book, or maybe it was spend more time with your kids.
So these 3 are very powerful questions. As you said, some might feel emotion charged, and give these thought, marinate on them. As Dan said, this can sometimes take people months to really get through, but give these thought over the next week. And we don't have a link for you to put in, say, a Google form or anything. If you do want to email us through the Dream Team and you just want to share it, we'd love to hear from you. And I'll say that anybody who shares it, we will keep your information anonymous. We wouldn't share that it's from XYZ. We would just share that we had these answers. And that goes for people listening to this on the podcast as well as through Zoom. We would love to hear, it may not be all of it. Maybe you don't want to share all of it. We would love to hear some of your responses to these 3 questions. So number 1, you've got all the money you need really forever. How does that change how you live your life? Number 2, you're going to have 5 or 10 really healthy years left. And what are you going to do with this time that you've got remaining? But money isn't limitless. So how are you going to strategically really make the most of these next 5 or 10 really healthy years? Or the third is you've only got 24 hours. And what are some of the things that would be going through your head as far as, things that you maybe wish you'd spent more time on, focused on, unfulfilled? And I think on that, as Dan said, sometimes people go to the regrets, and maybe it is a regret, but using that especially to help drive what's a priority to focus on from this point forward, because hopefully we don't have just that short 24 hours. But when we think about, well, what would that regret be, or what would be something that was unfulfilled, when we start to identify that, then we can start to act on it and really take steps toward that.
I sensed there was one question. Where was it?
I can pull it up in our chat.
It was, of all the places you've been, what is your favorite?
Oh man, that's tricky. Oh, I see it. It's going to Greece this next year. That's amazing. We love Greece. We kind of broke it down to in the world travels versus domestically, or even close domestically. I'll talk about both of those between the 2 trips. Gosh, when we were traveling the world, there's so many places that we loved, like New Zealand for kind of the natural beauty, glaciers and just incredible mountains and all this kind of stuff. Then, the other ones, we love archaeological sites. So Cambodia is full of incredible archaeological sites, or Myanmar, which is formerly Burma. But then kind of getting back west a little bit, Turkey, we loved Turkey. Istanbul, the city was amazing. Most places we'd go back to, but I guess that's kind of on the international trip, some of the places that really stood out. And then in the US, like we talked about, there's so many incredible places here. Like we love New Orleans. Most people have been there. But even, getting out to the national parks in Utah or California, or if you're able to make it up to Alaska, like Alaska is like out of this world extraordinary. It's like driving through a live safari. We would have grizzly bears on the side of the road as we were driving, which was amazing. But even for culture around the U.S. or close to the U.S., going to Mexico, like Mexico has some incredible places to visit. A lot of times we don't really crack the surface and get beyond the beaches, which are nice, in the Yucatan or on the coasts. But interior Mexico, like incredible culture, incredible food, archaeological sites, and it's easy to get to from the U.S. It's direct flights a lot of the time that are just an hour or a couple hours.
I think one thing I would add to that question that Margaret had about the favorite place is also kind of the big takeaway from me from some of the travels that we had was to allow enough time to let it unfold. And by that is not overscheduling, because in traveling and being able to talk to the people and meet the people of the place that you're staying and go to those grocery stores, go to those, of course, the dietitian, I like the grocery stores, but go to the stores, see the market, see how do they live, and really immerse there for a few days and start to know the locals and go to some of the off the beaten paths. But by not completely overextending or overscheduling yourself, you really get to hear and learn from them. And then if you learn of something new, well, let's try that versus, we can't go do that tonight because we already have dinner reservations at whatever. Leaving it open enough to where you can just truly experience wherever you land in your adventures.
Yeah, I was always told, plan on not over planning.
Right. Love that. All right. Well, Dan, I'm excited that we have you with us next week also. So our listeners, our audience, please consider these questions, think through them, email us with any other feedback. Dan will be joining us back next week for talking specific strategies for how do we prioritize? How do we move forward with this? How do we start saving? That is like a really big thing, because that can feel really daunting and overwhelming when it feels like we're strapped week to week anyway. How would we ever do this? And you have some really useful and painless strategies for us too. So awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. And everybody tell a friend about the series. Please spread the word.
Yes, spread the word. And thanks for tuning in, you guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, so to our podcast listeners, thank you also for listening, for tuning in, and working with us on this merge of a live Zoom that we're creating to podcast. So I hope that it was a smooth listen for you. And as we mentioned, I'll include the links that we talked about on the show notes of this episode, and also include those 3 questions that Dan gave us. And let me know what you think. Let me know if you're comfortable with sharing the answers to those 3 questions. We have our email address that I'll put in the show notes as well. Share as much with us as you would like, as little as you would like. And again, as we said, everything is confidential. Everything will be kept in-house. We would not share your name or have an association with it, but I would love to get a pulse of what y'all are thinking and how this is inspiring you to start to think about travel differently or think about experiences that you want to layer into your own life. So give those 3 questions some serious thought, and we will be back next week with Dan Meyers to talk through how he navigates these 3 questions and their answers, and also the specific strategies to prioritize adventure and travel specifically and start to save for it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.